Hello. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm just making sure you can hear me here. Hello and welcome to our afternoon panel. It's lovely to see all of you here, and people will be coming in throughout the rest of the talk, so the more the merrier. For those of you who I haven't met, my name is Sky, and I'm one of the organizers of Now Be Here. Thank you to Occidental College and Oxy Arts for inviting us to create such a special day, our main sponsor Artlogic, our sponsors East West Bank and ArtConverge, and to all the folks who collaborated with us to make this event happen. We appreciate you all. We'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that these events take place on and occupy the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. We acknowledge the Gabrielino Tongva as the original caretakers of Tovangar, which spans LA County, parts of northern Orange County, and the southern Channel Islands. We pay our respects to the Hanukvitam, ancestors, Ahihirom, elders, and Iuhinkem, our relatives' relations, past, present, and emerging. We are thrilled to welcome you to our afternoon panel titled No Unsolicited Submissions, Navigating Relationships with Curators and Gallerists. After the panel, we invite you to join us outside of this building for light refreshments and a closing celebration. It's been a joy to welcome you all, and we can't wait for this exciting conversation to round out a full day of fantastic programs and insights. The description of this session can be found in your booklets, and I'll read it here now. Museum and gallery websites often include a discreet yet loud and clear admonishment to artists. We do not accept or review unsolicited submissions. Despite its brevity, or perhaps because of it, this policy presents a sticky conundrum for artists and sets the tone for a lifetime of uncertainty in their relationships with curators and gallerists. While artists are responsible for introducing themselves to the professional partners they hope to collaborate with, artists are also implicitly and explicitly told that it is impolite, unprofessional, or even forbidden to approach them. And since many professional relationships in the field are time limited by the circumstances of the engagement, artists face this dilemma throughout their careers. This panel of local curators and gallerists, moderated by Corrina Peipon of Continuous Project, will explore the myths and realities of meeting, working with, and maintaining relationships with curators and gallerists over time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone, for being here. This day has already been really very inspiring, and I hope that we'll continue that energy through this afternoon. Really excited to be here with these four who are amazing folks in our field, and really, really glad to be here with all of you today. Before we get started, I want to express some gratitude to the whole Now Be Here team. They have been working for months tirelessly on this day, and thank you to everyone at Oxy Arts and the sponsors for this day as well, and the many people working here in Thorn Hall to bring this all to you. So thank you to everyone for that. I also want to really acknowledge the enormous, really, coalition of supporters who came together to make this day happen and really kind of raise their hands as organizations that support artists and art workers, really trying to essentially, I think, in a way, assert our presence here in Los Angeles and what we all do as an ecosystem to support the arts and create culture here in our city. And all of the artists here today who gathered for the historic photo this morning, just really thank you for being artists. Thank you for doing what you do. It's so important. We all need it more than ever. And thank you for being here again this afternoon for our panel. So as you know, I'm Corrina Peipon, and I'm the founder of Continuous Project, and I'm your guide for today's conversation this afternoon about establishing and maintaining relationships with curators and gallerists. I want to welcome our panelists and thank you all. I'm going to do very brief introductions because much is available about all of these people online, and I'd really rather spend our time getting into the topics than covering biographical information that you all can find. If you don't already know, our esteemed guest, Emily Butts, is director and director of curatorial affairs at Pitzer College Art Galleries in Claremont. And Adrianna Cole is director at Hoffman Donahue Gallery in Los Angeles. Segal is chief curator and director of programming at the Venda Museum in Culver City. And Amanda Sroka is senior curator at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, also known as the ICA LA. So just briefly, so you know, their brief bio stuff, but let's really get into the content of our conversation today. So I titled this panel, No Unsolicited Submissions, in a way to be provocative, but also to point out one of the sticky conventions in our field. Artists often feel barred from introducing themselves to prospective professional partners. What we're here to discuss more broadly, though, is how artists can best navigate relationships with museum and gallery partners. What are the best ways for artists to establish and maintain relationships with partners, and what do curators and gallerists expect from artists in their working relationships over time? So first of all, just so we know who's in the audience, show of hands, who in the audience is an artist? So most of you. And how many of you have at one time or another wanted to introduce yourself to a gallerist and maybe went to a website to think, you know, maybe I'm going to introduce myself to this person. I'm going to look for their contact information. And I go to a contact page and it says something to the effect of, we do not accept or review unsolicited submissions. And similarly, perhaps there are some of you artists who have wanted to meet curators, and you look up the institutions where they work and you search perhaps for a submissions policy or an email address, and maybe you can't find any way to meet someone, submit a proposal, introduce yourself. Also an experience some of you may have had. So there are a lot of reasons for this kind of gulf that exists in our field, and we're here today to hopefully bridge that a little bit. I know that when I went through my own BFA and MFA programs, there was both implicit and explicit messaging that I was somehow both responsible for building my own relationships and therefore my career with the curators and gallerists that I wanted to work with. But I was also simultaneously told that it was impolite or unprofessional or maybe even forbidden to approach these very same people. That was 25 years ago. And though the field is changing, I think these barriers to open communication can largely remain. I think that's clear by seeing the show of hands in this audience today. So there are both historical and practical reasons why we have these opacities in our field, but we're not going to go into detail of all that background today. What's more important is where we are now. And regardless, this messaging does create a gulf between artists and professional partners, which I think in the end doesn't really serve any of us. Then beyond that, of course, there's the whole question of once you are acquainted with professional partners, what's the expectation beyond that first introduction? And what's the expectation even beyond that? You know, this is life's work that we're all engaged with. So we're going to get into all of this and try to bridge some of that divide. Okay. So just to set the tone for our conversation and hear a little bit from each of you, I think it would be helpful for all of us to hear about a little bit about your curatorial and programming styles. What I'm most interested to hear, first of all, is some thoughts from each of you about how you learn about the artists that you might be interested in working with, whether it's for one-person exhibitions, thematic shows, historic exhibitions. It might be for gallery representation or exhibitions. What is your research process like? How do you learn about artists you work with, and kind of taking it from there? So I'll start with you, Emily.
Okay, sounds good. I'll just give a really brief overview because I do want to make sure we are having conversation, and also I know we want to open up to the audience for questions as well, so it can be a dialogue rather than us just sitting up here talking at you. But I would say the first way in which I engage with artists, it's part of the community that we've built, like the shared community that we've built. And so that is really sort of more so where this starts. I like to work highly collaboratively. I'm looking at people in the audience who I've worked with and in an iterative process. And so in my position at Pitzer in particular, we're a really small environment. And so we all work really, really closely with whoever artist or group of artists that we bring in. And so I think finding people who sort of share that same sort of orientation or approach to things is sort of where we've been at with this, in this current space that I'm in. But it has also varied at different institutions that I've worked in. So whether it's larger museums or other smaller nonprofits, I think it responds to also like the context in which I'm in. That's very broad, but pass it along.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I would say that, Emily, you talked about the community. Like, I think that it's kind of a way of like, how do you form a network of a place? Working at ICLA, which we're not solely committed in our programming to LA artists, but they are our primary, like one of our primary audiences. So when I started about 3.5 years ago, what felt really important was like there were of course a list of artists who, when moving to LA, I was like, I want to do visits with these artists and all these things. But I actually really, and I continue this and find this to be really fruitful, is that I really trust the artists that I visit with. So when doing a studio visit, I'll often end that visit or end that conversation, whether we're like in the studio or doing a walkthrough of their show at the gallery, of like, based on things that we talked about and ideas that came up, are there other artists you would recommend that I meet with or kind of continue this conversation with? And I feel like most of us maybe in the room are like suckers for footnotes, like following these breadcrumbs. And so I feel like who are the kind of footnotes for the artists that I'm really excited about, and then use that to keep branching and forming a network and a web. And that's mostly just to like get to know the texture of a place. And then sometimes those will result in like wanting to work on a show together, or sometimes it's like, okay, there's a theme or an idea for something like a group show. And it's like, who are the artists who are thinking about these things? And then maybe that initial group of artists totally changes by the end of the show. So yeah, I think kind of like following the pathways of artists themselves to kind of lead versus it being, from my own brain.
Thanks. So I might be a little bit of an outlier here because I work at the Wyndham Museum, which in its essence is a historical museum. It has a collection of art and artifacts from the Cold War period in socialist countries worldwide. But in our programs and exhibitions, we always make this connection between past and present. And in all our exhibitions, we also work with contemporary artists. But that is usually in a thematic context. So for instance, we recently had exhibitions of artists who were incarcerated or unhoused in the East and the West. We had an exhibition about surveillance and counter-surveillance. We have an upcoming exhibition about art and the cosmos. And when we are looking for contemporary artists, they have to fit in those topics that we are preparing. And within, to say a little bit about the research project or research strategy, I think for us it's important to find artists that align with the historical artifacts that we are also presenting, that are not too close to each other in their style and message, but that can support a kind of creative tension, so that people are invited who come to our exhibitions to think about different interpretations of history, different interpretations of art. And that means that for every single project we are organizing, the context is very different.
Yeah, I think I also might be an outlier as someone who works at a commercial gallery that is like completely unapologetically about, I mean, of course, like culture, but it's a for-profit institution. So I do think that that can take a little bit of the romance of finding an artist out of it. I think, to be totally honest, it's just in terms of finding artists, it's about who you're in conversation with. I think that galleries like to align themselves with other galleries, and maybe as a mid-level gallery, we're looking at other smaller galleries that we feel in conversation with, and then we're looking at other bigger galleries that we feel in conversation with, and finding artists might just be very logistically oriented of like, we have a spot to fill, this person comes to a lot of our openings, we can sell this, they don't have representation in LA. And yeah, I just want to be honest about the fact that sometimes it is like very, very practical. And sometimes the person who's in front of you might just be top of mind. And I do want to also say, just again, I don't want to be the one that's like capitalism, but I just, again, want to be honest. But I do think that it's a relationship-based thing. So it's like the person that I get along with. And I think that also can be kind of scary, because it does make all of the social dance, it puts so much more pressure on it. But truly, sometimes the person that I get along with, the person that my boss, that we enjoy and like their art. And the last thing I'll say, because we're going to continue talking about this, but as a gallerist, it takes 5 times for me to hear someone's name, for me to register it, for me to consider it. So I definitely go to other artists that we work with, and then I also go to my other peers. And like, I could think someone's amazing, but until I hear their name kind of vetted by other people who might be arbiters of taste, then it kind of can go over the slush pile.
Lots of emphasis on relationships here. In the first panel today, this also came up a lot. Our field is very social, it's very relational. And I think that is a feature and not a bug in a lot of ways. It really creates incredibly intimate networks of relationality that really have to do not only with, to your point, in a way like who we get along with, but really part of the reason we get along with the people we get along with is because we're thinking along the same lines. We have the same interests, we have the same concepts that we're working on, and we gravitate towards each other and self-select based on these lines of thinking, whether it's for a curatorial project or for commercial representation. It could be historic, it could be contemporary, it could be commercial. We brought you all together here because of the differences in your different venues where you each work, and the different ways that you all work with artists on those different kinds of platforms. So it's really illuminating to hear that emphasis on relationships. And I think we're seeing that so much today too, just bringing so many people together for this photograph and these conversations today. Just seeing everyone talking to each other, you can feel how so many projects are going to be springing forward, from just gathering today in person. So thank you for illuminating a little bit about the research process that does have to do with, of course, the particular concepts that you're working on for exhibitions, whether it's collection-oriented or more thematic in the contemporary art field, or for representation in galleries. I'm curious to know also, with this relationality, how do you each feel about artists reaching out to you directly. We have these strictures that, again, we could have a whole day's conversation about how this kind of gulf came to be. But we are where we are now, and I think things are changing a little bit. I'm hoping they are, with artists feeling more empowered to introduce themselves, really knowing that the social networks and the close relationships are a huge part of how visibility winds up happening. What are your thoughts about people reaching out to you, and how do you like to be approached, if at all? Let's go in the same order.
Okay. I would say, on our website, we don't accept, outside invitations. I wouldn't say that that's more so from a logistics standpoint, like our bandwidth as a team, to be quite honest. We are a really, really small team. And so just when it comes to reviewing and getting back, that is just challenging for us. Like, if I'm just being quite honest about like our team's capacity. That's not to say that we haven't had that happen and then shows do come out of it. So I think that is something that is kind of always a little bit on the table, but it does come back to like, who is this artist? How are they in conversation with what we're trying to do with this context that we're in? I work at a small liberal arts college, similar to Occidental, but smaller. And so how does this, like, what do the students need right now? What do they need to be talking about? So that's also like a really big driver, I would say, in terms of what programming I do, because it is a space for students and faculty to teach with. And so I have to listen to what they're asking as well. And so that we can be a space for certain conversations to be happening that the students might be asking or they might not be asking, and we want them to like think about it a little bit more. And so I would say it's not like a yes or a no, but it's part of this. There's like a lot of factors, I would say, for me that go into it, but it's, yeah.
Yeah, we don't have formally, like, on our website a policy for like soliciting application or soliciting proposals. But that said, being like a non-collecting institution that works often with outside curators, we actually do solicit proposals, but just more in that kind of like following that network. So like, I would say often like things emerge from these visits and conversations, not just with artists, but with peers, curatorially, of like, there's no shortage of kind of brilliant folks who are working that maybe aren't institutionalized yet or have a place to house those ideas. So I think prior to my time, there was actually a more formal process in place of kind of looking and reviewing proposals, but to Emily's point of like they're not having the capacity to really like support that kind of structure and framework. That said, we get so many emails. I get physical mail and portfolios sent that way, and we do look at them and write to every single person who reaches out as just also honoring the labor that went into putting that together. I would say how I prefer to go, like, to your question of how I prefer to communicate with artists or artists reach out to me. And this is what I often encourage artists to do is like, if you really admire someone's program, or whether that's a gallery, a curator, an institution, it's like show up for their events and introduce yourself after. And there's also then this kind of like brief opportunity. It's always quick, but then it's like, oh, this person like made the effort, and it's vulnerable to go and introduce yourself. And then kind of often I'll give my email and be like, reach out to me if you want to do a visit or share some, work with me or something like that. I've definitely had artists come up to me at openings and they're like, here is my physical proposal. And I would say that is not the place to do that. But
take note.
Yes. But that's just, I don't know if you've been to an ICLA opening, you also know we're all just kind of all over the map. I would say something, and maybe this is like very personal, but I think it's increasingly happens more and more, is kind of conversations over social media. I am somebody, and maybe I know we might get into this a little bit more in terms of like communications, but I personally just like, it takes me a really long time to like respond to someone's Instagram message. So I might like comment on something on social media and be like, I love this, I can't wait to do a visit with you. And then I'd reach out to the artist over email. And that might be like super old school, but I think that it's just maybe my way of also protecting certain spaces and time. But I know that some folks are like really, really comfortable and prefer communications over social media. So I would say like in terms of the various ways in which we kind of communicate and relate to one another in our world today, I'm pretty like personally very like old fashioned about it in terms of like meeting in person or like getting an email that has your info in it.
Yeah, and I recognize a lot of what you were saying, funnily enough. So for the Wyndham Museum, we do our research and look online and use our network to find potential artists who can work with us on specific topics. But it's always great when artists reach out themselves, because that's sometimes the only way I can know that you exist. That being said, there are better and worse ways of reaching out. One of the better ways is definitely coming to the museum and see if I am available and just talk a little bit, introduce yourself. Even better, I would say, is first sending an email. And if you do that, please make sure that it's not just about who you are and what you are doing, but also why you think that a connection specifically, in my case, with the Wyndham Museum would make sense. So show that you know about the museum, what it is about, what its philosophy is, and that you can argue that this can be a very interesting combination or partnership. Telephone messages are, please don't, I would say. Also, I don't look at social media for contact, so really email is preferred as far as I'm concerned. And before I decide to go on a studio visit, I always like to first invite an artist to come to the museum, show the context, and talk a little bit about what is feasible and under what conditions.
Yeah, I would love to just triple reiterate what everybody said. I also I work at art fairs as well, and that is absolutely the worst time to ever speak to me. You don't look at any dealer. They're trying so hard to make their sales goal. They're trying to make money for their artists. There's so much pressure at a fair. So just really like, it is not about finding the next big thing. I just want to be very clear about that. And then also, I think, supporting and being curious is a lot more infectious than trying to promote your own artwork. I think that yes, asking coming to openings, hi, bye, very brief. I'm honestly, again, going to be honest, like vibes are important, just brief, have a little bit of a mystery, and allow time to build on itself and allow someone to get comfortable with you. Because a lot of times at openings, it is about, there are specific agendas for people to accomplish, and a brief hello is so lovely, and it honestly makes someone like want to talk to you even more. Yes, and then an email of just, hello, nice show. I honestly would say just keep being brief until you really start to kind of push your own agenda, if I could be, a little bit crass about that as well.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because what you're saying is, I think what we've heard from each of you is that just as for all of us, there's 24 hours in the day. There's a lot on all of your plates. You all have really small staffs at your organizations, and you're simultaneously making exhibitions, making sales, doing fairs, researching your next exhibitions. If you're a collecting institution, you're also vetting, what's coming into the collection. There are many, many layers to each of your jobs. And I remember my first museum job, one of the things that I was introduced to on my first day of work was a giant table that was filled about this high and maybe 6 feet across with postal mail of submissions to the curator that I was working for at the time. And this was the backlog of introductions. And these introductions, part of the reason we're here today is to, in a way, encourage the introductions. And simultaneously, I think what we're really hearing here is that the relationships are two ways, right? And knowing what your focus of interest is, knowing what the program at Hoffman Donahue is about, knowing what the program at Pitzer is about, understanding the Venda, understanding ICALA and what your interests are as curators. These are all the kinds of factors that go into artists' selections of who they might want to reach out to, right? Because that relationality, coming back to that first question, that relationality is so important, that the relationship is not just based on, oh, I want to show at this institution. It's really also about the people at that institution and what strains of research you're working on, whether you're community oriented or historically oriented, whether you're a commercial gallery and what those commercial interests are. So before we get into questions from the audience, I did want to hear a little bit about, once you have relationships with the people that you're working with, tell us a little bit about how those relationships play out over time and the ways that you like to communicate with artists and the ways you want to be communicated with from the artists that you work with. So maybe we'll mix it up and start at the other end with you, Adrianna.
The ways that I like to be communicated with, I think, yes, stopping by the gallery is great, saying hello, just being, yes, intuitive about time and place. But yeah, email is great. Oh, I also wanted to say that it's really great to share good news with I imagine, with curators and with galleries. No one really wants, well, I think when you're close with someone, I mean, all of my best friends are artists, and a lot of my best friends are gallerists. And I think when you're close with them, yeah, we are venting all of the time. But I think it's really great to hear, like, oh my God, I just, like, quick, easy, like, I just had this really great opportunity come up, like, come to my show, or having an open studio, or just finish this sculpture, quick snap, like, just sharing positive news. I love that. It makes me feel excited. It makes me not want to dread seeing someone and hearing the same, like, kind of, it's hard for everyone. And I think that requires a certain closeness to be able to share about that.
I think to your point, this is a professional relationship. I think that's one of the tough things about the field, that yes, it is very relational, as we've all been talking about today, but there are also those boundaries to be established about the different things that we share, and each of you as in your roles, have things that there are boundaries that you hold information from the artists you work with, and artists also have those boundaries about, it's not about sharing everything that's going on in the studio, what is relevant to that specific relationship. How about you, Yos? Anything with regard to like how you work with artists perhaps over time and staying in touch with artists over time?
Yeah, so since the themes of our museum are so different, we usually only work once with one particular artist, but there are definitely exceptions. And speaking about boundaries, sometimes there are no boundaries because artists become friends, and then you just stay in touch and they become part of your network. They can advise their friends. Sometimes they show very, for me, unexpected aspects of their work that happen to perfectly align with something that we are preparing. So staying in touch is great. Doesn't mean that one artist will always come back in our exhibitions. But yeah, it's just part of the larger environment and the larger network that builds.
Yeah, I feel like I love getting to work with artists in multiple ways and multiple formats. I feel like we're also really blessed at ICLA because there's different kind of pools and pockets by which we can work with artists. And it's not always an exhibition. You know, I think that we were kind of talking a little bit beforehand of like having kind of relieving the pressure point that a studio visit with a curator or gallerist doesn't have to or will lead to a project together is just like really important from the onset to say. I feel like, but that said, you know, sometimes it's not always like I'll do a visit with an artist and it's like, oh, that artist, they don't need an exhibition, but they might be really what like their work needs or what they might need is like, you know, text about their work or, you know, to support them in a different way. And that doesn't always mean as an institution, that might be me individually. But just going back to what I was saying about kind of the ways in which at ICLA, we have so many different ways that we work with artists. We have artists who have been in our program and are now part of our artist advisory council. We have artists who have been in an exhibition, but are now kind of, we've re-engaged them through our artist point of view tours and our programming. They really do, like I often think about exhibitions as kind of like the beginning of a relationship. And sometimes, you know, you can't have a deep and long-standing necessarily relationship with every artist that you work with. But I do think there's been beautiful examples of kind of, you know, you're like kind of growing up together, going through the kind of different waves of the art world together and figuring out how to support each other in that process. So I think it can look a lot of different ways and it doesn't always have to be an exhibition or an acquisition or something like that.
I think, yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I do want to add just like one really quick thing, which is again, sort of more, I think, focused on the context of Pitzer College, but I always think about too the afterlives of an exhibition. So it's not just the studio visit or the research phase or the leading up to an exhibition, but really trying to engage with people who the students can also build relationships with. It's not just about me. Oftentimes artists come and speak with classes, or we've had interns that have gone on to work with artists that we've shown in the galleries. And so that's something that like I also keep in the back of my mind, just in terms of where this can continue to grow and how those networks can also grow, not just for me or the student, but the artist as well. And so they're getting support maybe by working with an intern or maybe a faculty member that they're able to connect with. And so it's really about like sort of that matchmaking that like I try to prioritize on my end.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Let's see if there's questions. Would anyone like to ask questions to our panel today? Right here in the pink. Being interrupted? So a social etiquette question in a way. How does one cut in to say hello?
I think that it's also just to say that I've had to cut in. I've been the one that has had to like cut into a collector conversation, or with the curator, I've been the one that didn't know anyone. And I think what I do very practically is when there's the gap, I just, hello, I'm Adrianna. It's like a super kind of like Japanese bow, like, hello, Adrianna. And then you recede and you feel the vibe. But I think a high bye is super appropriate and almost even like, oh, wow, that person really gets it. So yeah, a high bye is totally cool, I think.
I would say in terms of like, it's interesting because like in terms of the like vibe checkpoint of like, you know, okay, like it's not just like, oh, you know, I'm sure as artists you visit with curators and sometimes it's like that person did not get my work at all, or like, oh, I kind of don't want to spend time with them maybe, or have them, I don't know. But because I think it is a two-way, if we're talking about relationships, like it is two ways in that sense. And I'm just thinking about with your question of like, it says a lot about someone, how they react to being interrupted. So like one's ability to kind of like, we live in a world where it's just like, we have we already have, I think all of us know exactly what we're doing later today, or like have a timeline of where we need to be, because that's just like how the capitalist system works. But what happens when you are interrupted, I think as like, you know, whoever you're interrupting or going to meet with, how they might react to that will say a lot maybe about them as a person or personality. So pay attention to that.
Well, it can say a lot about the person or personality. It can also say a lot about reading the room or the specific circumstances when you are interrupting. For instance, if it is during an opening, which tends to be a very tense and hectic environment, it's usually it's absolutely fine to say, hey, this is my business card. I would like to talk with you at some point. I know you're busy now, but yeah, I wanted to say hi, which is great. But don't try to immediately tell your life story and things like that, or show your work on your phone, because that's not the right moment for it. Yeah.
I would also add, hi, bye is great, but if that's not possible or something happens or it's just, you know, not the right moment, I would not take that as a sign of discouragement. You can always reach out after and say, hey, like I didn't get a chance to say hi, was at the show XYZ, would love to share this, or whatever it is that you're wanting to communicate. So there's always the possibility and the option of a follow-up as well. So I just want to add that.
Other questions? McCall.
So that everyone.
Thanks. Where did that list come from that you came into when you came to LA? You mentioned having a list of artists, so I'm very curious about how that list develops. And the second question is, for all of you, it strikes me that the art world is a place that's so difficult for people who might be neurodiverse or introverted or struggling with some other kinds of like mobility issues or whatever, who maybe you can't get to openings, or you're gonna vomit if you have to speak out in public. What are your recommendations for that demographic?
I can answer the question about the list. It's so funny. I just meant like when moving to LA, having not lived here, there were artists who I knew I had relationships with, who I felt like I could meet with them. Now living in this context, folks who knew ICLA, who I could then be like, help direct me. That was both artists and curators, to be like, help me find my footing while I'm here. And I was very spoiled to have Anne, who's here in the audience, our director, Anne Elgood, and Oscar Hisa, both of whom have like incredible networks of connection in Los Angeles, who were like, come with me to these things, meet with these artists, so I think that it was both like coming in with like, who maybe like I thought I should be connecting with based on just like my experience on the East Coast and the handful of artists who I did work with in California and Los Angeles, and then letting that kind of, unspool from there. So yeah, it's kind of my own way that I like related to LA before I moved here, was where that came from. Does somebody else want to answer the second part, or I can?
Yeah, would anyone like to weigh in?
Sure, yeah. So I think even if you're very introverted or immobile, you will always be able to write an email. And if it is a nice email that explains what you're about and why it's relevant for, in my case, the Wyndham Museum, I'm always interested. So that should not be a hurdle, I think.
Other thoughts on that at all? Yeah, I think I know for myself, this was actually a really big problem for me when I first entered into the art world. I'm a total introvert, and doing this right now is a huge hurdle to be here on a stage. And I think that the two-way street that has come up so much today, the relationship building, it can happen in so many different ways. It can happen through email, it can happen in person, and there's been a lot of encouragement today for artists to go to these places, to your point, Nicole. I think that there is also, we haven't gotten so much into when you all are going out into the communities, which you also do a lot, and these networks of artists that you meet. I think one of the big takeaways of our conversation today is all of you who are colleagues with each other as artists can advocate for each other by visiting each other. I think that, and knowing what's going on in each other's studios, so that when folks like those who are in our panel today are going out into the world and asking the artists they're meeting with, who are the artists that you're interested in right now, that those names also circulate among the folks on the other side of the desk, so to speak. Yes.
Hello. We've talked a lot about openings, but I was wondering, in terms of saying hello, like coming during the week, like when the show is open, when you have maybe a little more time, is that something that is appreciated, or?
Yes.
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 I would say please send first an email, because I'm a lot in meetings, and when you come, it might not be at the right moment. So I would like to reserve time when you come.
Maybe one more? The mic is coming.
Hi, just to that question that you said at the beginning, if you can't find the person's email on the website, how do you send the email?
I have been an intern and have done so many admin tasks, and it's really easy to just find the info at occidental.com, and then I've honestly done this, like Adrianna at Occidental, okay, doesn't go through a .col, like just trying a few things.
Make up every email address you possibly can. I've done this too.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. But then I also just want to add very quickly that, like, sometimes it's not really about going straight to that person you're trying to reach. It's the solar system around them. So being in touch with the artists that they champion, or being in, the other galleries that they appreciate. Like, it's just kind of finding the solar system around the one thing. And that's a really great way to, and then you can ask, like, oh, what is that person's email? And people are pretty generous. And they might even connect you, and which is even better than a cold email, which I've done both.
Any other thoughts? All right, well, we will wrap up for today, because I know that there are some closing remarks that the Now Be Here folks are organizing. And I'm really, really grateful to all four of you for your openness, your candor, and all of the amazing work that you do in the institutions and galleries that you work with. And thank you again to all of you for being here today, and to all of the amazing work that you do. Really appreciate your presence, and hope to see you outside. We'll be mixing and hanging out for a little while, so say hi, bye.